Standing on today at night time is filled with homeless people in a city that's the wealthiest city in this nation of ours, at a time when we've got a surplus of $13.2 billion at the federal level, at a time when we have a surplus in Ontario of close to $3 billion. It would take $2 billion of investment in affordable housing, in social housing, to eradicate homelessness right here in this city. And yet we've got a Prime Minister and we've got a Premier of this province that do not see the homelessness as a priority as they look out at the state of our nation. As I walk to the hotel every single night from the convention centre, at 10 o'clock at night we step over the homeless sleeping on our streets outside of that very hotel, the Hilton across the street, and indeed the Sheraton Hotel. There are people sleeping on the streets in the wealthiest city in this nation. Sisters and brothers, there is something wrong. There is something wrong with that equation in this country. But even worse than that, the plight of the First Nations is a national disgrace. The plight of the First Nations, my friends, has got to be the front line in the battle against poverty in this country. How can it be that we've got communities in Northern Ontario and in British Columbia and in Quebec that are underneath permanent boil water orders? How can that be that are 200 communities, 200 First Nations communities living underneath boil water orders? And when we had one in Northern Ontario, Saskatchewan, what did they do instead of fixing the problem? They moved an entire community over to Sudbury, 400 miles away. Sisters and brothers, if that happened in a white community, if that happened in Oshawa, if that happened in Kelowna, do you think that we'd stand by and say to a community, let's move everybody out of Kelowna down the road to another community because you can't be able to drink the water? Why do we treat the First Nations like that? How do we get away with all this conspiracy of silence against the First Nations? How can it be that every time I go into Winnipeg, you're tripping over the Aboriginal communities? And nobody, the politicians of any political stripe, are standing up and saying, let's take that cause on. Sisters and brothers, I'll tell you, there is one movement can do it. It's within the ability and the power of the Labour movement to be able to address that issue. Put it front and centre, sisters and brothers. Make it the #1 priority of our union. Yes, privatisation is a problem, but by God, I think it even pales in comparison to people sleeping on the streets and our First Nations people being treated like second-class citizens. That cannot be allowed to happen. And I'll finish off by saying that there are things we can do, sisters and brothers. We can demand affordable housing, no question about it. I think we got to stop talking about just $10 as a minimum wage. It's time we start talking about a living wage, which is a lot higher than $10, my friends. And they've done that in other nations. We can do it here in Canada. The third thing we can do, sisters and brothers, the best hedge against poverty is to join a trade union. Become part of the Labour movement. We need to change the legislation such that when you sign a card, it means that you can join a union and be part of a union. We need card certification in this province and every other nation across the country. And my final message is to those leaders out there who think that they found a new way to work with the boss, like giving up the right to strike. Give me a break, sisters and brothers. The only greatest hedge you've got against the employers in this country so as we can have a decent wage is the right to strike. That's the difference between poverty, my friend, and having a decent standard of living. And don't let anybody ever tell you that somehow going to a bargaining table with your cap in your hand and bending on your knee is going to raise our workers out of poverty. No, sisters and brothers, there's too many people in this nation have fought for the right to strike. I would say, sisters and brothers, stand behind that principle. That's a principle that raises people from poverty. Thank you very much.